I invited him in at midnight, this beautiful 23-year-old neighbor, thinking I still had the power to seduce anyone I wanted. By 2 a.m., I understood the horrifying truth about what I'd become, and it was already too late. Don't miss a single beat of this story. Subscribe, like, share with someone who loves gripping stories, and drop your thoughts below. My 10 p.m. stories. One story every night at 10 p.m. The snow fell outside my apartment window like ash from a cremation I didn't know was happening. Mine. I watched it through the glass, bourbon in hand. My fourth of the evening, though I'd stopped counting years ago. The doctor's voice still echoed in my skull from this morning's appointment. Donna, your liver can't take much more. You need to stop drinking. Now. I laughed, actually laughed in his face. What else do I have? I'd asked him. He didn't answer, couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. At 71, I still looked 55, maybe 60 on bad days. Good genes, expensive creams, and sheer stubborn vanity had preserved what time tried to steal. My hair, still thick in auburn, with just strategic silver threads, fell past my shoulders. My body, though softer now, maintained its shape. Men still looked. They always looked. But looking and staying were different countries, and I'd spent 50 years visiting the first while the second remained forever out of reach. My apartment was immaculate. Designer furniture, silk curtains, and original artwork on walls painted in sophisticated grays and creams. Everything is perfect. Everything empty. The silence pressed against my eardrums like hands trying to suffocate me. I needed noise. I needed someone. Anyone. That's when I thought of him, my neighbor in 3B, the graduate student who'd moved in 3 months ago, whose eyes lingered a fraction too long when we passed in the hallway. His name was Marco, and he was beautiful in that careless way only young men can be. 23 years old, studying architecture, with dark curls that fell across his forehead, and green eyes that seemed to undress the world around him, analyzing its structure, its weaknesses. I'd noticed him noticing me, or so I'd convinced myself. I poured another drink, feeling the familiar warmth spread through my chest. The bourbon made everything possible, every fantasy achievable. In my mind, I was still the woman who'd walked into boardrooms and left executives stammering, still the woman who'd had her CEO wrapped around her finger for 15 years, who'd turned down marriage proposals because I was waiting for something better, someone richer, more handsome, more everything. 3 times I'd almost married. 3 times I'd walked away. Robert had been steady, loyal, utterly devoted, but too ordinary. His love felt like beige wallpaper when I wanted fireworks, so I'd chosen excitement instead, chosen the next handsome face, the next adventure, the next bottle, the next party. Now, decades later, Robert was probably a grandfather to a dozen kids, surrounded by family at Christmas, while I sat alone watching snowfall. I shook the thought away. No, tonight wasn't about regret. Tonight was about proving I still had it, that age was just a number, that desire didn't have an expiration date stamped on your forehead the moment you turned 70. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. Still beautiful, still powerful. I had no idea I was looking at a ghost. I stood outside his door at 11:47 p.m., my hand raised to knock, my heart pounding with an excitement I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. I'd changed into a black silk robe that hinted at everything underneath, applied makeup with a practiced hand, spritzed perfume at my pulse points. The bourbon gave me courage and smoothed the edges of doubt trying to creep in. Just before my knuckles touched wood, I heard voices inside, his voice and a woman's, laughing. The sound pierced through my chest like a cold blade. Of course he had someone. Of course. I lowered my hand, suddenly feeling ridiculous, standing in the hallway in a silk robe at midnight like some desperate... The door opened. Marco stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something else, something I couldn't quite read. Behind him, a young woman, pretty, probably 20, with sleep-tousled hair, peered around his shoulder curiously. "Miss Donna?" His voice held genuine concern. "Are you okay? Do you need something?" The way he said it, like I was his grandmother who'd wandered out confused in the night, like I needed help finding my way back to my room. My prepared seduction evaporated. I heard noise, just wanted to make sure everything was all right. "We're fine," he said gently, too gently, "just studying. You should get some rest, it's late." Then he closed the door, and I heard her voice, muffled but clear enough. "Is she okay?" She seemed kind of out of it. Something inside me cracked, but I refused to acknowledge it. Back in my apartment, I drained my glass and poured another. The humiliation burned hotter than the alcohol. How dare he look at me like that? Like I was some pathetic old woman instead of what? The question hung in the air, unanswered. At 1:15 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Miss Donna, this is Marco from 3B. Sophie just left. I wanted to apologize if we were too loud earlier. Also, are you really okay? You seemed upset. If you want to talk, my door's open. I mean that. Sometimes late nights are the loneliest." I stared at the message for 5 full minutes. The words rearranged themselves in my bourbon-soaked brain. He was alone now. His girlfriend had left, and he was reaching out to me, inviting me. This was the universe giving me a second chance. I typed back, "I'm fine, but thank you for asking. It means more than you know." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Want some company? I made too much coffee anyway. Could bring some over if you'd like." My hands trembled as I responded. That would be lovely. 20 minutes later, he knocked on my door. I'd reapplied lipstick, adjusted my robe, and arranged myself on the sofa in what I imagined was an alluring pose. When I opened the door, he stood there with 2 cups of coffee and the most genuine smile I'd seen in years. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, stepping inside. "Sleep and I have been strangers for a long time," I said, trying to make my voice sound sultry instead of slurred. What I didn't see then, what I was too drunk and desperate to notice, was the pity in his eyes. Marco sat in the armchair across from me, not on the sofa where I'd hoped he'd settle. He looked around my apartment with those analytical eyes, taking in the expensive emptiness, the perfectly curated loneliness. "This place is beautiful, like something from a magazine. But," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "do you mind if I ask you something personal?" "Anything," I breathed, leaning forward slightly, letting the robe slip just a fraction. "When was the last time you had someone over? Besides me, I mean. When was the last time this place felt lived in instead of displayed?" The question caught me off guard, not the seductive opening I'd expected. I have friends. They visit." "When?" I couldn't remember. Maria had died 2 years ago. Catherine had moved to Florida to be near her grandchildren. When had I last spoken to Linda? "You're lonely," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I see you sometimes through your window when I'm coming home late. You're always sitting right there, glass in hand, staring out at nothing. It worries me." "Worries you?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "I don't need a child's concern." "I'm not a child." His voice was patient, kind, which somehow made it worse. "And you're not okay. Anyone can see that. The drinking, the isolation. Miss Donna, when was the last time you were genuinely happy?" The bourbon made me bold and reckless. "I could be happy right now, if you wanted. I'm not as old as you think. I'm still beautiful?" "You are. That's not the question." His words stopped me cold. "I don't understand," I whispered, though part of me did. Part of me had always understood and spent 50 years running from it. Marco leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression so earnest it hurt to look at. "My grandmother lives alone now, has for 10 years, since my grandfather died. She's 83, and you know what? She's happier than she's ever been. book clubs, volunteer work, friends she sees every week, a life full of purpose and connection, not because men desire her, but because she desires life itself. That's different, I said quickly. She had a husband, she had a family, she had her time. And you didn't? The question hung between us like an executioner's blade. I reached for my glass with shaking hands. The bourbon sloshed over the rim, staining my silk robe. I didn't care. I made choices, I said, my voice harder now. I chose freedom. I chose excitement. I chose not to settle for boring men with boring lives. I was beautiful. I am beautiful. Men wanted me. They still want me. Do they? Marco's voice was so gentle it felt like violence. Or do they want what you give them? No strings, no commitment, no expectations. That's not desire, Miss Donna. That's convenience. Rage flooded through me. How dare you? You come into my home and judge me? You know nothing about my life, about what I've— You're right, he interrupted. I don't know your whole story, but I know what I see. And what I see is someone who's been running so long she doesn't remember what she's running from. Stay with me. This story is just getting darker. Subscribe now and don't miss the rest of tonight's tale at 10 p.m. Something in his words penetrated the alcohol fog, reached the part of me I'd buried under decades of parties and affairs and desperate attempts to prove I was still young, still relevant, still worth wanting. His eyes weren't clean, I whispered more to myself than to him. What? Marco looked confused. That's what I told myself about you, that your eyes weren't clean when you looked at me, that you wanted me. The confession spilled out before I could stop it. But they were clean, weren't they? You weren't looking at me with desire. You were looking at me with concern, with compassion, like I'm some wounded animal you pass on the street. Not pity, Marco said firmly. Compassion. There's a difference. I look at you and see someone in pain, someone who's been in pain for a very long time and has been trying to drown it instead of heal it. I wanted to argue, wanted to seduce him, to prove him wrong, to make him want me the way men used to want me. Instead, tears I hadn't cried in 20 years began sliding down my carefully made-up face. I had chances, I heard myself say. Robert loved me, really loved me, not for my body or my beauty, but for me. And I threw him away because he wasn't exciting enough, wasn't rich enough, wasn't handsome enough. I was waiting for perfection, and while I waited, life happened to everyone else. Marco moved to the sofa then, sitting beside me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I didn't feel quite so alone. It's not too late to have a different life, just a different kind than you imagined. Yes, it is, I sobbed. Don't you see? I traded everything for nothing. No husband, no children, no family, friends dead or gone, my own body failing because I've poisoned it for decades. What do I have? This apartment? These things? I gestured wildly at my perfect empty life. I'm going to die alone, and no one will even notice I'm gone. That's when Marco said the words that would haunt me forever. You're already alone, Miss Donna. You've been alone for years. The question isn't whether you'll die that way, it's whether you'll live differently with whatever time you have left. The words landed like physical blows. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room spun, and for a terrifying moment I wasn't sure if it was the bourbon or a stroke or my mind finally shattering under the weight of 50 years of denial. I need you to leave, I whispered. Miss Donna, now! The scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate. Get out! Get out of my home! Marco stood slowly, his face full of that terrible compassion I couldn't bear. I'm in 3B if you need anything. Please, drink some water, get some sleep. We can talk tomorrow when— There won't be a tomorrow. Not with you, not with anyone. Just go. He left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. I sat in the silence, bourbon glass still clutched in my hand, and finally looked at my reflection in the dark window. Really looked, not at the carefully maintained exterior, but at what lay beneath. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, hollow-eyed, desperate, clinging to a youth that had abandoned her decades ago while she'd been too drunk and too proud to notice. I'd spent 50 years collecting men like trophies, proving I was desirable, valuable, worth something, and ended up with nothing but memories that tasted like ash and regret. Robert's face flickered through my mind. Patient, kind Robert with his ordinary job and his extraordinary love. Where was he now? Surrounded by grandchildren, probably, telling stories by a fireplace, held by a woman who'd been smart enough to choose substance over sparkle. I'd had my chance at that life, multiple chances, and I'd laughed in their faces. The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor in a spray of crystal and bourbon that looked, in the dim light, like blood. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the broken glass. Minutes, hours, time had become meaningless, just another thing I'd wasted without realizing its value until it was gone. My phone buzzed, a text from Marco. "Please tell me you're okay. I'm sorry if I overstepped, but I meant what I said. It's not too late to choose differently." Too late, too late. The words echoed in my skull like a death knell. I thought about my CEO, Robert Chen, the married man who'd kept me as his mistress for 15 years, how I'd told myself I was powerful, that I had control, that I was the one using him. The truth? He'd gotten everything he wanted, sex without commitment, excitement without risk, while his wife raised his children and built his home. And when he'd retired 5 years ago, he'd simply stopped calling, replaced me with someone younger without a second thought. I attended his retirement party, watched him slow dance with his wife while their 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren looked on with love. No one had even known who I was. I was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of someone else's real life. Every man I'd been with had left me, every single one, because I'd never been a person to them, just a beautiful convenience, a secret, something to use and discard. And I'd let them. No, I encouraged it, told myself I was free, independent, and choosing my own path. But freedom without connection is just isolation with better marketing. The thought hit me with such force, I actually gasped aloud. 50 years of choosing wrong, and only now, at 71, with a failing liver and an empty apartment, did I finally understand what I'd done to myself. I'd chosen to be nothing to anyone rather than risk being something to someone who might eventually leave. But they'd all left anyway. The difference was they had lives to return to, and I had nothing. I stared at his message for 10 full minutes, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. Finally, I managed, "No, I'm not all right. I haven't been all right since the day I walked away from you, maybe long before that. I'm alone, Robert, completely alone, and I deserve to be." The 3 dots appeared again, disappeared, appeared. No one deserves to be alone, Donna. Not even people who've made mistakes. We all make mistakes. God knows I made plenty. Not like mine. You offered me everything, and I threw it away because I wanted something shinier, someone richer, more exciting. And I got exactly what I chose, a lifetime of excitement with nothing to show for it. You had a life, a family, love, everything I was too stupid and vain to accept. A longer pause this time. Then, I did have those things, and I was grateful every single day for them. My wife, Margaret, was a good woman, better than I deserved. We had 42 years together before the cancer took her. But Donna, there were nights, especially in those early years, when I wondered what my life would have been like if you'd said yes, if you'd chosen me. The confession stunned me. You wondered about me after how I treated you? We don't stop wondering about the people we loved just because they didn't love us back. That's not how the heart works. But wondering and living are different things. I chose to live, to move forward, to build something real with someone who wanted the same things I did. You made your choices too, different ones. That doesn't make you evil, Donna, just human. His grace was unbearable. I didn't deserve it, didn't deserve his kindness after what I'd done. I'm dying, Robert. My liver's failing. The doctor says if I don't stop drinking now, I have maybe a year. And I can't stop. I've tried. I don't know how to be alone and sober. I don't know how to face what I've become without something to blur the edges. Then don't do it alone. Let me help you. When dawn broke over the city, painting my apartment in shades of gold and pink that felt obscene in their beauty, I was still sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by broken glass and scattered photographs and the wreckage of a life I'd spent decades building and one night destroying. But I wasn't alone. Robert had stayed on the phone with me for 3 hours, talking, listening, not judging, just being present in a way no one had been for me in longer than I could remember, maybe ever. He'd made me promise to call a treatment center, to call my doctor, to pour every bottle in my apartment down the drain before the sun came up. And I'd done it, not because I thought I could be fixed, I was too broken for that, too damaged by decades of choosing wrong, but because for the first time in 50 years, someone was asking me to choose life instead of slow suicide. Someone cared enough to ask. Marco had been right. I'd been alone for years, decades, maybe my entire life. I'd surrounded myself with people and still been utterly, devastatingly isolated because I'd never let anyone actually see me, never let anyone past the beautiful exterior to the terrified woman underneath who was so afraid of rejection she rejected everyone first. At 7 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marco standing there with coffee and concern written across his young face. He said, "I heard glass breaking last night. Wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm not okay," I told him, the first honest thing I'd said to him since we'd met. "But maybe I could be, someday, if I make different choices." "That's all any of us can do," he said. "Make different choices, one day at a time." He helped me clean up the glass, helped me bag up the photographs to sort through later when I was stronger, helped me shower and dress and make the phone calls I needed to make. He didn't have to, he barely knew me, but he did it anyway, because sometimes kindness comes from unexpected places. That afternoon, Robert drove 3 hours to see me. The man I'd rejected 50 years ago walked into my apartment, gray-haired and weathered, but still with those same kind eyes, and hugged me like I was something precious instead of something broken. We can't get back what we lost, can't undo the past, but we can choose different futures, if you want to. I did want to. God help me, I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything in my entire life. Some truths arrive too late to save us from our mistakes, but just in time to save us from ourselves. I'm 71 years old, finally learning that beauty without substance is just a lovely corpse, that being desired is nothing compared to being known, that it's never too late to choose differently, even when it feels like it. If this story touched you, stay with me for the next one. Subscribe, like, share it with someone who would feel it, and leave your thoughts in the comments. My 10 p.m. stories, one story every night at 10 p.m.